Welcome to the Vault Archons. I am the Keeper of Keys, Kraz, and today we are going to look at the weakest cards in Keyforge. So, and when I say weakest, I don't mean weakest as in strength, obviously, because this is a Strength 9 Pit Lord. And you do gain 2 Amber when you play him. And he has Taunt. So he has some good abilities, but his downside is when you do play Pit Lord, you must choose Dis on your turn as long as Pit Lord is in play. Now, this could be a problem if you run out of cards and don't manage to remove him. If your opponent doesn't have any creatures for you to swing against and have him die, and then eventually you have no discards in your hand and the only card left on the board you have is Pit Lord. Your opponent knows this, and so they just keep declaring houses to get their Amber out slowly but surely, knowing that you can do absolutely nothing but reap 1 single Amber every single turn. Another thing that your opponent can do, if they have the Restrin Guntist card, they can then declare House Dis as the house that you cannot declare. And this card will then prevent you from declaring House Dis. And since you have to declare House Dis, you then play houseless according to the rules. You then will be playing the game without a house. And once you do that, the problem that you're going to run into is you then can only use abilities that are Omni, and most abilities that are Omni have to have come, well, actually all abilities that I know of that are Omni have to have come into play the turn before. So this is an Omni ability that could get rid of the Pit Lord. If you brought it into play the turn that the Pit Lord came into play, but this artifact is vulnerable to your opponent playing cards like Poltergeist, right? So if you play the Pit Lord and you don't remove it on the turn you play it, you may never get rid of it. So just be aware of that. That can end your game. And so this card can preemptively be the end of your game. Now there are ways to play the Pit Lord. Easiest way to play the Pit Lord would be if you have enough creatures, you can then put him to where he's not on the flank, put creatures on either side of him. That way you can then use a removal card like Hand of Dis and kill him. So then you get the 2 Amber from playing him, and then you remove him from the board. Or you could do things like 3 Fates and remove him. You can do things like Gateway to Dis and remove him. You can do things like have this already on the board and use the Omni ability and wipe him. So you'd want to play him in conjunction with something that's going to clear him. That way you can get the 2 Amber and you don't put yourself in the position where your opponent can cripple you. And when I say cripple you, I mean completely cripple you, where you just can't play. So you need to be very careful when playing this card, and you need to be ready to remove him on the turn he's played. So it's not that he's unplayable, but he's not playable as a creature. He's playable as a +2 Amber gain. I would never keep this creature on the board. Under no circumstances would I keep this creature on the board. Because there's just too many ways for your opponent to cripple you if you do. So the second card we're going to look at that is, in my opinion, one of the weakest cards. Again, not strength-wise, but his ability-wise. So when you play this guy, the problem that he generates is you can no longer play creatures. So if your opponent is able to cripple you in one way or the other, disallowing you to attack, disallowing you to use your creatures, doing different things and clearing off everything but this guy and keeping him somewhat contained, at that point you no longer can add creatures to the board, which eliminates one of your entire gameplays. Now, there are ways to play him. Say you have an incredibly weak creature deck. You have almost no creatures in your deck. You don't really care about playing your creatures. Then he can be useful. But for the most part, in almost every deck he's going to generate, this is a bad play. You don't want to bring him into play because he's going to stop you from playing your other creatures, and your opponent can take advantage of that. There's plenty of cards that can. So you need to be very careful with him. Now, there are ways to use him. You can use him with the custom virus. So you can then use his beast creature type to then clear all beasts from the board. You can also use him, if this guy's already on the board, you can reap and then archive him. You can do things like use Mating Season on him to get rid of him off the board. This would be a way to gain amber from him. And as you can see, these cards, you need other cards to make them useful. Now, you could use this guy, reveal him from your hand, archive him, gain 3 strength. Reveal him, pick your archive up next turn, reveal him, gain 3 strength. You can use him as a constant feeder for this guy to make this guy a useful card. That can be a very useful card. If you leave him on the board 1 turn and have total recall, you could use this. But if your opponent manages to discard a card from your hand and total recall comes out and you don't have any other way to deal with it, you then are in the situation where you can't play creatures, and if they can find a way to cripple you, which is very possible with different card use, this can be a problem. So you have to be very careful when you play cards that can limit your options, and this is a card that limits your options, not your opponent's. After that, this is a card that's being played incorrectly by most people. And the reason is, if you go to the rules section on Fantasy Flight's website and scroll all the way to the bottom of their rules, you will find that if your opponent kills the creature that this is on, they get to choose whether it goes to your archive or not. And that means that they're always going to choose to discard the creature. They're never going to send it to your archive. I shouldn't say that. There are circumstances where they'd send it to your archive, like you have a bunch of their creatures archived, so they send it there hoping you'll pick it up. But usually, if you're using this, you're probably not archiving their creatures. You may be, I don't know. But you can play it for the 1 amber. You can play it as I play it on my creature attacks, I then archive my creature after it dies. There's ways to make this card useful. Just be aware that there's a lot of people that are going to be misplaying this card. And just check out the rules on Fantasy Flight's website, and you'll get the correct way of playing this card. I'm not a huge fan of the way that they ruled this card, because the intent of this card was that the owner of the creature got to choose whether to archive it or not. But because of the wording, they chose to do it this way to keep the wording consistent, and I understand. After that, we're going to look at another card that generates poorly almost every time. This card is an artifact, so it's prone to being cleared. And the other problems with it is it requires you to both fight and destroy creatures to get use out of it. So you either need a lot of things that allow you to fight out of house, or you need a lot of things that allow you to fight with your Brobnar board. And you need to have a good Brobnar board to take advantage of it, or good boards in other house to take advantage of it. So you need a lot of other cards to make this card useful. And a lot of the decks I've seen it generate in, it just does not generate well. So this usually turns out to be a not so good card. Just be aware of that. It's not the worst in the game. There's definitely ones that are worse. This just happens to be one that just doesn't generate well. After that, the next one we're going to look at is then Take That Smarty Pants. Now this one, unless you're playing against Logos, you're just getting a single amber. And I'm just using this card as an example. This is true for every card that targets a house specifically. There are cards in Keyforge, and there's many of them, and I didn't pull them all out to do a demonstration. But any card that targets a single house or a very specific subset of a house, that is going to be a relatively weak card. There's just not a lot of circumstances you're going to be playing it. If you're fighting a deck that doesn't have it at all, you're just going to get the 1 amber from the card. So it's not a dead card, but it's definitely one that is not always that useful. And so there's much better cards to have. So these are just really cards that there are ways to use, but you have to be very cautious when using them, or most of the time they're just not that useful. So there you go. And that's my opinion of the weakest cards. So if anybody else sees anything else or knows of any other cards that are weaker than these, please let me know, and I will be happy to take a look at it. So have a wonderful day.